The unexpected encounter. The city skyline glittered like a sheet of broken glass spread against the dark velvet of the night sky. From the penthouse suite of one of the tallest towers in Manhattan, the world below seemed distant, almost irrelevant. Logan Pierce, a billionaire known in financial circles as a man who never lost a deal, walked with his usual precision through the silent corridors of his home. Every step he took echoed against the marble tiles, crisp and authoritative like the sound of a gavel striking down. The penthouse was a reflection of his life, clean lines, expensive art, and polished perfection. But for all the perfection, there was a hollowness that no decor could fill. Logan carried with him not just wealth but the lingering ache of loss, the burden of raising his infant daughter Maya, alone after his wife's sudden passing. He had built empires, bent markets to his will, and commanded boardrooms filled with rivals, yet he found himself most uncertain in the quiet moments when his daughter cried in the middle of the night. It was on one such night that something unexpected happened. Logan had just returned from a late meeting where tempers had flared, shareholders had demanded answers, and his phone had buzzed with endless reminders of crises to be managed. He loosened his tie as he walked down the hallway, his mind already preparing for the next battle with his restless board of directors. But as he neared the nursery door, a faint sound made him stop. It wasn't the wail of his daughter which he had grown accustomed to, nor was it the hum of the machines that kept the air in the room perfect. It was a low murmur, soft and melodic, carrying with it a weight of care. Logan paused, hand hovering, near the door handle, and for the first time in a long while he felt hesitation. Slowly he pushed the door open. What he saw stopped him cold. There, in the glow of the nightlight, sat a woman he had never seen before. She wore a simple nanny's uniform, plain and unassuming. But the way she held Maya in her arms made her presence impossible to ignore. The baby, who usually fussed until exhaustion, was calm, eyes half closed, lips curled around a warm bottle, tiny fingers gripping the woman's hand with quiet trust. The rocking chair creaked gently as the woman swayed, her voice low, almost like a lullaby carried on the breath of someone who knew how to quiet storms. For a man who was used to control, who dictated the rhythm of entire industries, Logan found himself standing still, silenced by a scene that belonged not in the world of contracts and deadlines, but in the timeless world of care and connection. "Who are you?" Logan asked at last, his voice controlled but edged with steel. He wasn't a man who tolerated surprises, especially not in his own home, in the one room that held the most precious thing in his life. The woman looked up, her dark eyes steady, unflinching yet not confrontational. She spoke in a voice that carried calm authority without arrogance. "Marissa Cole. I was sent by Bright Care. They said you needed someone tonight." Her tone was measured, careful, as if she knew one wrong word could break the fragile silence Maya had found. Logan stepped forward, his instinct half urging him to take his daughter back. But Maya shifted slightly, pressing her cheek into Marissa's arm, drinking a few more sips before sighing. That small act of trust stopped him in his tracks. Logan's jaw tightened. "I made it clear. No one touches her without my permission." His words came out sharp, but inside, it wasn't anger that moved him. It was fear, the same fear that had haunted him since the day his wife passed, leaving him alone with a daughter he adored but didn't know how to raise. He was a master of numbers, strategy, and power. But when it came to the cries of his child, he often felt like a soldier stranded without a weapon. Marissa didn't flinch at his tone. She didn't rush to apologize or stammer excuses like so many others did in his presence. Instead, she adjusted the bottle slightly, her eyes still on him but her hands steady on the baby. "She was crying," Marissa said simply, "to the point of hiccups. I couldn't just watch." Her honesty carried a quiet strength, a refusal to bow down, yet no arrogance, only purpose. Logan pointed to the crib. "Put her down." He wanted to reclaim control, to reassert authority in his own home. But Marissa shook her head slightly. "Not yet," she said. "If you put her down right now, she'll wake again. Her body needs to feel held long enough to settle. If you let go too soon, the startle reflex will undo everything. She spoke with the assurance of someone who wasn't guessing, someone who had lived these moments countless times. Logan folded his arms, the walls he built around himself rising back into place. You talk like you've done this 1,000 times. Marissa's gaze softened, not with pity but with memory. Once is enough to change you forever, she replied quietly. Her words carried weight, and Logan, despite himself, felt their truth. He studied her. This woman, unpolished and plain compared to the glossy professionals he was used to, spoke not in theories but in truths forged through experience. He was used to people trying to impress him, flatter him, win his approval, but she did none of that. She simply did what needed to be done for the child. It unsettled him, and yet it anchored him in a way he hadn't expected. For the first time in a long time, Logan felt himself yield, not in defeat, but in recognition of something beyond his control. How do you know what she needs? He asked, part challenge, part curiosity. Marissa shifted Maya slightly, cupping the baby's head with practiced care. Because I've been there, she said. Alone, with a baby who depended on me, when I had nothing left to give. My son lost his father when he was 2 months old. There were nights I thought I wouldn't make it. But you learn. You keep going because they need you to. Her voice didn't dramatize the story. She spoke of it like someone who had accepted her scars and found strength in them. Logan felt something shift inside him. He had built his world on logic, on cold efficiency. But here in this room, logic was useless. A child didn't care for charts or profits. She cared for presence, and presence was something money couldn't buy. His phone buzzed on the changing table. He glanced at it. 3 missed calls from Charlotte Hayes, the chairwoman of his board. Important calls, no doubt, about the crisis he had been avoiding. He turned the phone face down. Marissa noticed but didn't pry. She simply continued rocking Maya. You're avoiding something important, she observed softly. Logan bristled. You don't know what's happening in my company. Marissa's response was even, free of mockery. I know when someone's pretending there isn't a problem. Her words pierced through his defenses, not because they were accusatory, but because they were true. For a man who lived surrounded by people who feared his judgment, it was startling to meet someone who saw through him so effortlessly. Maya's tiny body relaxed fully against Marissa's chest. Her breathing evened, her small fists unclenched. Marissa set the bottle aside, pulled a muslin blanket over her, and continued rocking. Logan found himself lowering his voice as though afraid to break the spell. I've never been good with the bottle, he admitted, surprising himself with the confession. I'm afraid I'll do it wrong. Marissa's lips curved in a faint smile, not mocking but understanding. Most fathers are. You're used to control, to seeing results when you push for them. But babies don't work like that. The only thing you can control is showing up. The rest is patience. Logan swallowed hard. Patience. It was a word that had rarely existed in his world of quick results and relentless pace. Yet here it was, shaping the calm of his daughter's sleep. At last, Marissa rose, moving with the fluidity of someone who had done this countless times. She set Maya in the crib at an angle, her palm resting gently on the baby's chest for 3 steady breaths before pulling away. The child didn't stir. Logan stood there, watching, feeling both humbled and unsettled. Where did you learn that? He asked. Marissa's eyes held a flicker of memory. Long nights with no one else to take a shift. Her words were simple, but the depth behind them was immeasurable. She straightened, smoothing the blanket over Maya, then turned toward Logan. Money can buy a crib, a blanket, even the best formula, she said quietly. But it can't buy trust. That has to be given. And once it is, it's the most valuable thing in the world. For a long moment, Logan didn't respond. He had spent years measuring value in dollars and deals, but now he was being confronted with a truth he couldn't quantify. The air in the nursery was thick with the quiet rhythm of his daughter's sleep, and the presence of a stranger who seemed to understand more about his world than he did. His phone buzzed again, insistent, demanding. This time, it was a message. From Charlotte. Logan, answer now. Whitstone has proposed new terms. We need you. Logan turned it off. For once, the world outside could wait. He looked at Marissa, who was adjusting the monitor and scanning the corners of the room with the practiced caution of someone who had lived through moments of uncertainty. She wasn't just a nanny. She was someone who carried battles of her own, someone whose strength came from surviving what should have broken her. And somehow that strength had just steadied his home. Logan's voice dropped softer than he intended. Thank you. Marissa inclined her head slightly as though gratitude was unnecessary for simply doing what was right. She moved toward the door, but her words lingered behind. She doesn't need perfect. She needs safe. The word safe struck Logan like a blade against the hollow inside him. Safe. For all his wealth, all his security, he had never truly understood that word until this moment. Not until he saw his daughter breathing calmly in her crib, her chest rising and falling in perfect rhythm because someone else had given her what he could not. As the city lights flickered through the sheer curtains, Logan realized something profound. Tonight was no ordinary night. Tonight was the night a stranger walked into his home, fed his child, and unknowingly planted a seed that would change everything. The boardroom storm and the woman at the door. The next morning dawned with the same routine precision that governed Logan Pierce's life. Yet something about the air inside the penthouse felt different. The city below was alive with horns and chatter, the constant hum of commerce. But Logan's attention was caught not by the screens flashing market updates in his study, nor by the urgent emails flooding his phone, but by the quiet sounds from the nursery. For once, Maya wasn't crying. She was cooing, soft giggles bubbling out as Marissa adjusted her blanket and sang a tune faint enough to blend with the morning light. Logan stood in the doorway for longer than he cared to admit, watching, trying to reconcile the hardened man who dominated global headlines with the father who didn't know how to hold his own daughter, without fear of doing it wrong. He had built walls so high that few dared even to test them. And yet here was this woman, a stranger only hours before, who had stepped inside without hesitation and brought peace to the one space he valued most. By the time Logan arrived at the company headquarters later that morning, the mask of control was firmly back in place. His driver pulled up to the private entrance and Logan stepped out in a tailored suit, every inch the tycoon the world expected. Inside the boardroom, tension was thick. The board members, led by Charlotte Hayes, were restless. Charts and projections lined the walls, each one a battlefield of numbers. Logan, Charlotte began, her voice clipped. We can't keep stalling. Whitstone's proposal is our best option to stabilize the share price before the quarter ends. Logan adjusted his cufflinks and scanned the room. He saw the fear in their eyes. Not fear of him, but fear of the unknown. Fear that the empire he had built might collapse if they didn't bow to the demands of competitors. But Logan had never been one to surrender. Selling the infrastructure I spent years building isn't saving the company, he said, his voice steady. It's selling its soul. And if you think I'll let that happen, you've forgotten who I am. The debate grew heated. Voices clashed, arguments piled on, and accusations lingered in the air. To outsiders, it was just another day of corporate warfare. But inside Logan's chest, something else stirred. The words of Marissa from the night before echoed faintly. They don't need perfect, they need safe. He wondered absurdly for a moment if that truth applied not just to his daughter, but to the empire he had built. His board wanted short-term perfection, flawless numbers on a quarterly report. But what his company needed was long-term safety, AET, or foundation strong enough to endure storms. Logan's eyes narrowed as the arguments raged on. He wasn't going to bend. Not now, not ever. By the time he returned home that evening, exhaustion pressed against his shoulders like lead. He had fought battles all day, and though he had held his ground, he knew the war was far from over. When he stepped into the penthouse, the quiet struck him first. Not the suffocating silence of loneliness, but a calmer one. He followed it to the nursery where he found Marissa again, Maya was asleep in her crib, her tiny chest rising and falling with a rhythm so steady it almost felt like music. Marissa stood by the window, looking out over the city, her posture straight but not rigid, her hands folded loosely. She turned when she sensed him. "Rough day?" she asked, her tone even, not intrusive. Logan gave a dry laugh. "You could say that." He loosened his tie, setting his phone face down on the dresser without checking the messages he knew were piling up. For once he didn't care. Marissa studied him, her eyes calm but observant. "The weight you carry shows," she said, "but you hide it well." Logan tilted his head, both curious and wary. "And how would you know?" Marissa didn't smile, didn't flatter. "Because I've hidden mine too, for years, and I can see the difference between someone strong and someone just carrying the silence like armor." Her words cut deeper than any accusation from his board could. He looked away toward his daughter's crib, trying to ground himself in the sight of her sleeping. "I thought silence was how I protected her," he admitted quietly. "That, if I kept everything locked inside, no one could use it against me. But maybe—" He trailed off, not wanting to finish the thought. Marissa stepped closer, her voice still soft but steady. "Silence keeps the world out. But it also keeps people who could stand beside you away. Sometimes strength is letting someone else see the cracks." Logan's throat tightened, though he masked it with a shake of his head. He wasn't used to being seen this way, and certainly not by someone who was supposed to be temporary help. Before he could respond, a sharp knock echoed through the penthouse, breaking the fragile moment. Logan's eyes snapped toward the door, his instincts shifting instantly from reflective father to guarded protector. Marissa's posture changed too, her calm presence tightening into alert readiness. She moved to stand slightly in front of the nursery hallway, not blocking Logan, but aligning herself as if by instinct. "Stay here," she said quietly, her voice carrying the kind of authority that came not from arrogance but from experience. Logan, unaccustomed to yielding control, almost argued, but something in her tone stopped him. He nodded once. Together they walked toward the main door, Logan checking the camera feed on the wall console. Two men stood outside, dressed in sharp suits, their confidence practiced but their eyes too restless to belong to true professionals. Logan's jaw clenched. He recognized the type, not official, but carrying the weight of someone else's power. He opened the door just enough to stand tall in the threshold. The man on the left spoke first, his voice smooth like a lawyer. "Mr. Pierce, we need a word about certain outstanding matters, specifically debts associated with Mrs. Elena Pierce's estate." Logan stiffened at the mention of his late wife. The man on the right leaned slightly, trying to peer past Logan into the hallway. Marissa shifted subtly, placing one hand against the frame, her body language calm but firm, silently blocking the view. "You have 3 seconds to step back," she said, her tone measured, low enough not to wake the child but sharp enough to slice through the air. The men exchanged glances, surprised at her calm defiance. "And you are?" one sneered. Marissa's eyes didn't waver. "The one who decides this conversation ends now before it reaches a child's door." For a moment, silence hung heavy. Logan, watching from half a step behind, realized he was witnessing something unfamiliar. In the boardroom, he was always the one who stood tall, who dictated the rhythm of confrontation. But here, at his own door, someone else had taken that stance, and it was working. The men shifted, their confidence thinning. Finally, the one on the left stepped back. "We'll return," he muttered. Marissa's gaze didn't soften. "Not tonight, and never at this door again." She closed the door firmly, locking it with steady hands before turning back. Logan exhaled slowly, the adrenaline still burning in his veins. "They weren't here for debt," Marissa said simply. "They were here to test if this house has someone standing guard. Now they know it does." Logan studied her, the image etched in his mind, not just of a nanny caring for his daughter, but of a guardian standing between his family and the world. For the first time in years, he felt a strange sensation ripple through him. Safety. Real. Safety. Not the kind bought with security teams and iron gates, but the kind embodied in someone's stance, in the refusal to yield. Later, as they sat in the living room, the city lights casting shadows across the walls, Logan found himself breaking another habit. He asked about her. Not casually, not as small talk, but with genuine curiosity. "You said you have a son." Marissa nodded, her face softening with a smile that carried both pride and weariness. "Jordan, he's 8. Brilliant, stubborn, and he thinks every locked door is just another puzzle to solve." Logan allowed himself a chuckle, a sound that surprised even him. "Sounds like he takes after you." Marissa shrugged lightly. "He was born premature. There were nights I counted every breath, wondering if he would make it. That's why I don't dismiss fear. Fear teaches you what matters first, what matters later. You learn the rhythm." Logan leaned back, his gaze on the ceiling. "I thought I could buy safety, steel doors, security teams, lawyers. But tonight I saw another kind, someone standing in the right place at the right time." Marissa didn't smile in triumph. She simply nodded. "Safety isn't in things. It's in presence. A child feels rhythm. When you keep the rhythm, they give you their trust. That's what keeps a home steady." As her words settled into the silence, Logan realized something. This woman, who had walked into his life by chance, was teaching him truths that no amount of wealth or power had ever revealed. She wasn't perfect, and she didn't claim to be. But she was steady, and in her steadiness he found a glimpse of the life he wanted for his daughter. A life not built on fear, but on safety, rhythm, and trust. For a man who had spent years building empires, the realization was staggering. That night, as he finally allowed himself to rest, Logan knew this was only the beginning. The boardroom storms were far from over, the men at the door would likely return, and the weight of his past still lingered. But now, for the first time in years, he wasn't facing it alone. Shadows of the past and cracks in the armor. The days that followed blurred into a rhythm neither Logan nor Marissa expected. For years, Logan's penthouse had been a fortress, of silence broken only by the cries of his daughter and the sterile sounds of machines humming in the background. Now it was filled with something new. Soft lullabies, quiet laughter, the rustle of blankets as Maya discovered comfort in arms that weren't afraid to hold her. Logan, though still cautious, found himself lingering longer near the nursery, not to assert control, but to observe, to learn. Every evening, when he returned from battles at the office, he was drawn to the same scene. Marissa with Maya in her arms, calm and steady as if her presence alone had redrawn the boundaries of his home. But beneath the rhythm of new trust, storms brewed in both their lives. Logan's board grew more hostile with each passing day, their pressure mounting as they pushed him to sell parts of the company he had poured his life into. Every meeting was a war of words, and though Logan held his ground, he felt the isolation of leadership pressing hard against him. In the world of power, allies were rare, and betrayal was common. Yet in his private life, a paradox was unfolding. A stranger, hired under temporary necessity, was beginning to feel more like an ally than anyone seated at his corporate table. It was one late evening after a particularly grueling meeting that Logan returned home to find Marissa not in the nursery but in the living room. She sat on the couch, her posture unusually tense, her phone in her hand. She quickly slipped it into her pocket as he entered, but not before he caught a glimpse of a photo on the screen. A young boy, smiling widely, his eyes bright with mischief. "Your son?" Logan asked quietly, breaking the silence. Marissa nodded, her features softening with maternal pride. "Jordan, he's everything." Logan studied her, sensing the weight beneath those simple words. "You don't talk about him much." Marissa exhaled slowly. "Because talking means remembering, and remembering means feeling the things I can't always afford to feel." For a man accustomed to dissecting strategies, Logan was caught off guard by her honesty. He moved closer, not intruding but curious. "What happened?" Marissa hesitated, her gaze fixed on the skyline through the floor-to-ceiling windows. His father was a police officer. My husband. He was killed on duty when Jordan was only 2 months old. I was left with a baby, bills, and a badge that suddenly meant nothing. The nights were long. I learned to survive because I had no choice. Her voice was steady, but Logan heard the undercurrent of pain, the kind carried not as a wound but as a scar. I worked jobs no one else wanted. Nights in shelters, days cleaning offices, anything to put food on the table. And every time I thought I couldn't go on, Jordan's breathing pulled me forward. That's how I learned rhythm. That's how I learned that safety isn't about walls or doors. It's about presence. That's all children want. Someone who shows up. Logan leaned back, letting her words sink in. He thought of his own battles, his wealth, his relentless pursuit of power. None of it prepared him for fatherhood. And yet here was a woman who had faced the unimaginable and survived, not through wealth or influence, but through sheer resilience. "You're stronger than anyone I've ever met," he admitted, his voice quieter than usual. Marissa shook her head. "No. I'm just a mother who refused to let her child be swallowed by the world. That's not strength. That's necessity." Logan almost argued, but he stopped, realizing she wasn't seeking praise. She was stating truth. Their conversation was interrupted by the sudden buzz of Logan's phone. He glanced at it. Another urgent message from Charlotte. Meeting rescheduled. Opposition intensifying. Prepare counteroffer. Logan exhaled sharply, frustration tightening his chest. "The board is circling like vultures," he muttered. Marissa studied him. "And what will you do?" Logan met her gaze, his jaw hard. "What I always do. Fight until I win." Marissa tilted her head slightly. "And if winning costs more than you realize?" Her words unsettled him. He had always calculated. Costs in numbers, never in lives or peace. But now, with Maya asleep down the hall and Marissa's steady gaze fixed on him, he felt the question press deeper than he wanted to admit. The following night, the threats returned. Not from the boardroom, but from the world outside his door. The same two men reappeared, this time with a folder of documents and sharper words. "Mr. Pierce," the man on the left said smoothly, "it's not just debt anymore. There are obligations your wife left behind. If you don't cooperate, your name and reputation may suffer. And reputations, as you know, are worth more than money." Logan's hands curled into fists, but before he could respond, Marissa stepped forward again. Her stance was calm, yet her presence filled the doorway like a shield. "You've made your point," she said firmly. "Now leave." The man sneered. "You think you can protect him? Do you even know who we represent?" Marissa's eyes didn't waver. "I know enough, and I know you don't get to bring threats to a child's home. Not while I'm standing here." This time the confrontation was sharper. The men lingered longer, testing boundaries, their words edged with menace. But Marissa didn't flinch. She didn't raise her voice, didn't show fear. She simply held her ground with the kind of quiet strength that made bluster crumble. Finally they left, muttering promises to return. Logan shut the door and turned to her, his voice low but charged. "You didn't have to do that." Marissa met his gaze evenly. "Yes, I did. Because you were about to fight them with anger. And anger is what they came to provoke. Sometimes strength isn't about striking back. It's about refusing to play their game." Logan stared at her, realizing again how different she was from everyone else in his world. He was used to people who calculated moves, who schemed, who manipulated. But Marissa's strength came from something simpler, purer. She wasn't playing games. She was protecting. Not for power, not for gain, but for the principle that no child should ever feel unsafe in their own home. It shook him, because it revealed just how fragile his carefully constructed world truly was. That night, after Maya was settled, Logan poured 2 cups of tea and sat opposite Marissa in the quiet of the living room. "You've stood at my door twice now," he said slowly. "You've faced down threats that weren't yours to bear. Why?" Marissa sipped her tea before answering. Because I know what it's like to face the world alone. And I won't let a child feel that. Not if I can help it. Jordan taught me that. And maybe, just maybe, I can remind you too, that silence and walls aren't enough. Presence is what saves us. Her words lingered in the air, heavy with meaning. Logan looked at her, and for the first time, he saw not just a nanny, not just a stranger, but someone who had stepped into his fractured world and begun to piece it back together, one steady breath at a time. As midnight settled over the city, Logan realized something profound. His wealth, his empire, his endless battles in the boardroom, all of it seemed hollow compared to the fragile peace now filling his home. Marissa had brought safety not with money or power, but with presence, resilience, and truth. And for the first time since his wife's death, Logan felt the cracks in his armor not as weaknesses to be hidden, but as openings through which light could finally enter. Betrayal and the breaking point. The tension in Logan Pierce's life reached a dangerous peak as winter winds lashed against the glass walls of his penthouse. For weeks, he had been holding the line against a hostile board, fending off pressures to sell the very foundation of his empire. Every morning was another battle of wills, every evening another attempt to gather strength before returning to war. Yet while the boardroom clawed at his empire, threats closer to home were circling like predators scenting blood. Logan had spent years preparing for every financial contingency, but he had never prepared for what it meant to be targeted as a father. His wealth was armor, but now it had become a magnet for danger. Inside his home, however, a fragile sanctuary had begun to form. Marissa's presence changed the air, softened edges, steadied rhythms. Maya was calmer, sleeping longer through the nights, laughing more during the day. Logan noticed the transformation with a mixture of relief and disbelief. He had poured millions into expert consultations and child care specialists, but none of them had achieved what this woman did with nothing more than steady hands, quiet, strength, and a rhythm carved from her own scars. Slowly, almost against his will, Logan began to lean on her. Not openly, not yet, but in the unspoken ways he found himself looking for her presence when the day's storms left him raw. But safety, as Marissa often reminded him, was never permanent. One evening, after another bitter board meeting, Logan returned home to find an envelope slipped under his door. Inside were printed photos, not of him, but of Maya. Grainy shots, from a distance taken in the park, on the balcony, even once as Marissa carried her out of the building. Logan's stomach dropped as he flipped through them. His protective instincts roared to life, his mind already racing through names, suspects, motives. He had enemies, yes, but this felt different. This was personal. When Marissa saw the photos, her expression tightened, though she remained calm. "They're escalating," she said simply. Logan turned to her, his voice edged with fear he rarely let show. "What do they want?" Marissa studied the photos carefully. Leverage, fear. They want to remind you that money can't guard every angle. They're testing how far you'll go to protect what matters. Her voice didn't tremble, but Logan saw the flicker of memory in her eyes, the look of someone who had lived this kind of fear before. The next day at the office, Logan walked into a trap he had not anticipated. Charlotte Hayes, his longtime ally turned adversary, revealed her hand. "Logan," she said coolly, "you've lost the confidence of the board. Unless you agree to the sale, we're prepared to move forward without you." Logan stared at her, rage simmering beneath his calm exterior. He had built this empire from the ground up, sacrificed more than anyone in the room, and now they wanted to strip it from him under the guise of saving it. But as his eyes scanned the table, he saw what Marissa had warned him about. Silence, being used as a weapon. Every director sat in tense stillness, waiting for him to break. Logan exhaled slowly, realizing the betrayal ran deeper than he thought. He wasn't just fighting opponents anymore. He was surrounded by deserters. That evening, he returned home later than usual, his mind heavy with the weight of corporate war. When he walked in, he found Marissa sitting at the kitchen table, her phone in her hand, her posture more tense than usual. She slipped the phone away quickly, but Logan caught enough to sense something wasn't right. "What is it?" he asked. Marissa hesitated before answering. "I got a message today, from someone I used to know, someone I hoped I'd never hear from again." Her voice was steady, but her eyes betrayed the storm behind them. Logan frowned, stepping closer. "Who?" Marissa drew a long breath. "An old case, from when my husband was alive. He arrested someone dangerous, someone who swore revenge. I thought when my husband died it ended there. But now—" She trailed off, her eyes flicking toward the nursery where Maya slept. Logan's chest tightened. "You think they're connected? The men at the door? The photos?" Marissa nodded slightly. "Possibly. People like that don't forget. And they don't forgive." The realization hit Logan like a blow. His world was already under siege from the corporate vultures circling his company. But now his private life was being pulled into danger by forces far darker. Yet even as fear surged through him, he noticed something remarkable. Marissa wasn't backing down. She wasn't running. Instead, she sat straighter, her expression resolute. "I'll protect her," she said firmly, meaning Maya. "No matter what comes, I'll stand at that door again if I have to." Logan stared at her, the weight of her promise sinking deep. For years, he had surrounded himself with people motivated by contracts, profits, and self-preservation. And here was someone whose only weapon was resilience, whose only motivation was love and principle. It was a force more unshakable than wealth, and Logan felt it anchoring him in ways he had never known. But the threats didn't stop. A few nights later, the power in the penthouse flickered out for the first time in years. Emergency systems kicked in, but the outage left the air charged with unease. Logan checked the security console, only to find the cameras temporarily disabled. It wasn't a coincidence. He moved quickly toward the nursery, where Marissa was already standing by Maya's crib, her posture alert, her eyes sharp in the dim glow of the emergency lights. "Stay here," Logan said, his voice edged with command. But Marissa shook her head. "No, we face it together." Before he could argue, a loud bang rattled against the door. Logan's body tensed, but Marissa stepped forward, calm and deliberate. She pressed a hand against the frame, her stance solid. "You can't buy your way out of this one," she said quietly, her words directed not just at Logan but at herself. "This is about who stands and who runs." The banging stopped as suddenly as it began. Silence followed, thick and oppressive. Then, slowly, the hum of power returned. The cameras flickered back to life. Nothing more happened that night, but Logan understood the message clearly. The threats were escalating and the people behind them wanted him rattled. As he stood beside Marissa, watching Maya sleep peacefully despite the storm outside, he realized something profound. His wealth, his empire, his strategies, none of it mattered in this moment. What mattered was the woman standing guard beside him, the one person who refused to flinch even when shadows from her own past came knocking. Later, when the house was calm again, Logan poured a drink and sat across from Marissa in the quiet living room. He studied her carefully, the way her eyes remained steady even when the world pressed hard against her. "You're not just a nanny," he said at last. Marissa's lips curved faintly, but her voice was steady. "I never claimed to be." Logan leaned forward, his voice low but charged. "You've done more for me and Maya than anyone else ever has. You've stood at the door, you've calmed the storm, you've faced threats that weren't even yours." "Why?" Marissa met his gaze, her eyes unwavering. "Because I know what it's like to lose everything, and I refuse to let anyone else feel that if I can help it. Jordan taught me that. My husband's death taught me that. Sometimes the only way to survive is to stand for someone else." Logan sat back, his chest heavy with emotions he rarely allowed himself to feel. Gratitude, respect, even admiration. For years he had thought strength meant control, dominance, power. But now he saw a different kind of strength, one that came Not from wealth but from resilience. One that didn't dominate but protected, didn't command but steadied. And for the first time in a long time, Logan Pierce, billionaire tycoon, felt something unfamiliar in his chest. Hope. Redemption, revelation, and the choice of tomorrow. The final days of winter were the hardest Logan Pierce had ever faced. Outside, snowstorms painted the city white, burying streets under blankets of silence. But inside the penthouse, the storm was far louder. His company stood on the edge of collapse, his board prepared to overthrow him, and his enemies had grown bold enough to slip threats under his very door. Logan had spent years believing he was untouchable, protected by walls of wealth, guarded by contracts, secure in the fortress of power. But those walls had cracked, and through the cracks came not just fear, but a strange, unfamiliar light. The presence of a woman who had entered his life uninvited, and yet had become its anchor. Marissa had proven herself again and again in ways Logan could hardly put into words. She had stood at his door when strangers threatened, calmed his daughter with a rhythm no machine could replicate, and faced shadows from her past without trembling. She had shown him a truth he had never dared to believe, that safety wasn't something money could buy. It was something people created through presence and trust. Each night when he returned from war in the boardroom, he no longer entered a hollow penthouse. He came home to Maya's laughter, to Marissa's quiet steadiness, and to a peace that could not be priced. But peace was fragile, and the world was not done testing him. The board staged its coup in a high-rise conference room, cold and sterile, under fluorescent lights. Charlotte Hayes, once his closest ally, now stood as his fiercest adversary. "Logan," she said with a calmness that carried venom, "the vote is complete. You're out, effective immediately." Around the table, directors nodded, their silence heavy with betrayal. Logan stood tall, his tailored suit immaculate, but inside he felt the ground shift beneath him. He had lost. The empire he built was being stripped from him, not by rivals, but by the very hands he had trusted. Yet as he gathered his papers and walked out of that room, his mind was not on wealth or reputation. It was on the child waiting for him at home, and the woman who had taught him that walls meant nothing if the heart behind them was hollow. That night, when he returned to the penthouse, he found Marissa waiting in the living room, her expression calm but her eyes searching. She saw the defeat in his shoulders before he spoke. "They pushed me out," he admitted, his voice lower than usual. "Everything I built, they took it." Marissa didn't offer hollow reassurances. She didn't tell him it would be fine. She simply said, "And yet you're still standing, which means you haven't lost everything." Logan sank into the chair opposite her, running a hand through his hair. What if this is all I am? A man who built an empire and then watched it crumble? Marissa shook her head. "No, you're a father, and she doesn't care about empires. She cares about whether you show up." Her words hit him harder than any boardroom betrayal. For years he had believed his identity was bound to his empire, but now, stripped of it, he was confronted with the question he had avoided. Who was he without it? Before he could answer, the phone rang. A call not from Charlotte, but from an unlisted number. When he answered, a voice he didn't recognize spoke with slow menace. "We warned you, Pierce. You thought you could ignore us. Next time, we won't just leave pictures." The line went dead before Logan could respond. His hand tightened around the phone as fury surged through him. But before he could explode, Marissa's steady voice cut through. "They're escalating, which means they're desperate. Desperate people make mistakes." She stood, her presence steady as stone. "But we won't." That night was the breaking point. Logan installed extra guards at the entrance, called in favors from security firms, prepared every defense money could buy. But when the knock came again, hard, deliberate, echoing through the penthouse walls, it wasn't the guards who moved first. It was Marissa. She stepped forward, calm and unyielding, her posture firm as she opened the door just enough to meet the eyes of the intruders, the same men from before now joined by another, larger, more imposing. "Step aside," one demanded. "This doesn't concern you." Marissa's voice was steady, low but sharp. "Everything concerning this child concerns me. You don't get to bring fear into this home." For a tense moment, the hallway was thick with unspoken threats. Then Logan stepped beside her, not behind her. His voice was sharp, his presence commanding. "You think you can break me with fear? You're wrong. You can take my company, my wealth, my empire, but you won't touch my daughter." The men hesitated, unnerved by the unity they hadn't expected. What they had come to measure, weakness, was replaced by something stronger than money: resolve. Finally, with muttered threats, they withdrew. The door shut, and silence returned, but it was no longer the silence of fear. It was the silence of defiance. Afterward, Logan turned to Marissa, his voice rough with gratitude. "You've stood at that door more times than I can count. Why? Why risk yourself for me? For her?" Marissa's eyes softened. "Because I know what it's like to lose, and I refuse to let you feel that if I can help it. Safety isn't in walls, it's in presence, and presence is a choice." Logan swallowed hard, the weight of her words pressing deep into his chest. He realized then that everything he had believed about strength, control, dominance, wealth was wrong. True strength was this: showing up when it mattered, standing when it was easier to run, protecting when the cost was high. In the weeks that followed, Logan began to rebuild, not his empire, but his life. He spent mornings with Maya, fumbling, with bottles but learning patience. He spent evenings listening to Marissa, her stories of Jordan, her lessons on resilience. Slowly, the hollow places in his chest began to fill, not with power, but with presence. And when opportunities came, again as they always did for men like him, Logan faced them differently. He no longer chased perfection or control. He sought safety, trust, and rhythm. On a quiet spring morning, as sunlight poured through the nursery windows, Logan watched Marissa cradle Maya, humming softly as the baby drifted to sleep. For the first time in years, he felt peace. True peace. He stepped closer, his voice low. "I used to think my wealth was my greatest achievement. Now I know it's her, and the people who stand for her." Marissa looked up, her eyes steady. "Then you've already won." And in that moment, Logan Pierce, the man once known as the Deal Machine, understood the truth he had been blind to his entire life. Empires rise and fall, wealth comes and goes, but the legacy that matters is not built in boardrooms or bank accounts. It is built in the presence we give, the safety we create, and the love we choose to stand for.